Hello, Gene. Welcome. Really nice to meet you.
Hello, Arthur. Nice meeting you.
I'm extremely stoked. You have absolutely no idea. And obviously, like you can see, I dabble in guitar. So if you're sitting in your studio, I sit in
Right.
my studio, which is like the first thing. But I'm gonna just like go straight in with the question that I have.
You got it.
Um, so the Dark Angel came back from rather prolonged hiatus when it comes to releasing new music and etc. And also, you as Gene, you've been on the scene, but like if mathing correct, since you were what, like 15, 16?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
But yeah,
And that was only when I was starting to do things actually in the scene. I was involved in the scene for a couple of years before that by attending tons of these club shows and getting to know all these bands that tons of them went on to great heights and things like that. But that's when I started getting really actively involved in the scene. Was I was like 15 or so. That's when I was
yeah. So
doing a bunch of stuff then.
you basically seen it all, and now you're coming out with new songs. By the way, absolutely grand. Um,
Thank you.
my question is, how do you feel about the trash scene or like music scene in general in 2025 after seeing it all throughout the years?
Well, one thing you know being a witness to all permutations of metal over the years, like even all the stuff before I started putting out records. I've been such a fan of metal, a fan of music. All metal fans are music fans as well. I don't think you got the small minority of people that like all I listen to is metal. I've never been one of those guys. Metal is my flat out favorite style of music. I listen to everything as most people do. Um, but seeing metal being able to evolve in all ways that it does, and none of it comes from necessity. All of the evolution of metal comes from new ideas being placed into it, new influences being pulled in from all different areas. I maybe like say you take some kind of BS like commercial pop that, well, you have to evolve because you have to do this in order to keep your fan base and keep all those record buying public buying your product. Metal, just like if somebody decides to haul in this kind of influence, they will. And so that's where, like say thrash metal evolving from the very traditional metal that came before it, like all the Judas Priest, big influence, Motorhead, big influence, um, Iron Maiden, big influence. But that's those sort of influences. Man, I'm speaking back in the day, back in 1983 kind of thing, 82, 83. Those sort of elements being blended with punk rock that was big at the time with the aggression and the speed and that sort of thing, and just melding those. That was just kind of a natural occurrence that happened. So it's not like it was anything contrived or anything. So um, these days, I think metal, at least genuine metal, is evolving in whichever ways everybody wants it to evolve. Are there outliers in the metal scene that are a little bit more contrived? I'm not there. There obviously are, but I do find that metal will, since metal has a very rabid, following, that following will follow wherever metal wants to go, and people are open-minded to the point where it if something is good, it's going to catch on, and so that's where a lot of the evolution that metal takes place. Does it sound now the way it did back in 1980? No. No, it doesn't, and that's a good thing, because we're not in 1980. So having everybody have their influences that they're showing now, down tuning is a huge thing. In 1992 through 98, lead guitar was not a thing. And now you got all these technical bands, groove was the big thing. And a lot of those, a lot of those bands that thought they were grooving, I don't know that they necessarily were grooving, but but the lead guitar was thrown out the window. And now you got, everybody from, Animals as leaders to Polyphia to all these, guitar shred is back in. And, and that's the cyclical nature of everything. It's really easy to see if something dies now and come back in 20 years, just give it some time. And that was really easy to see back in the 70s, I was a big fan of music in the 70s, and that's when the 50s became really big again with Happy Days and things like that. So, doo-wop became big in the 70s, and that was 20 years later. And so in the 90s, it was really easy. I bet you the 70s music is going to come back. Sure enough, there it is. 70s music, big again in the 90s. So whatever happened 20 years ago is going to be big again. Now, new metal is coming back. That's about 20 years old. Everybody wants to do that groove sort of thing. And, Papa Roach still gets to have themselves a touring schedule and bands like that. So, metal will always evolve, and it will always, I think, genuinely reflect on what it's past. And if you did something good 20 years ago and you disappeared for a little bit, to give it some time, you'll get to play again. You'll get the shot again. Dark Angel, here we are.
Exactly. Which is like when I was listening to the old stuff, and also like I was never much into thrash. Like it never clicked with me for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I always had a lot of respect for all the thrash music, because for me it's basically punk on steroids. You do whatever the hell you want, and that's all. And then I was listening to Dark Angel, and it turns out I knew a lot of the songs just because like somehow they've reached me. And then I was listening to the new stuff, and I was like, this doesn't sound in particularly like new stuff, but it doesn't sound like old stuff. I had this like very uncanny valley listening to the two new singles, and there's a very big build up to a question that I want to ask, which is, um, how do you like right now? You're back releasing new music, which from my research and researching right now is extremely hard with AI and everything. But like this album has been in the works for a rather long time, like from the first demos to whatever it is right now. Where do you think Dark Angel will go in the future? Like you playing, how do you envision the evolution of the band?
Well, one thing that I am pretty good at is I've always called it, willing. I will things into existence, and I've spent my entire life willing me to be whatever area I'm at in life. So, I guess some of the newer terms for it are things like manifestation and visualization, and I never had any idea about those terms. It's like, oh, I willed this to happen. And then somebody's pointing out, hey, do you know that you're manifesting things? I'm like, whatever those terms mean, all I know is I willed this into happening. So whatever evolution Dark Angel is undergoing, and an ever evolving phase that the band is in, that's where, like when it comes to the new album, and since there's been about a 34-year gap between new Dark Angel material, and a decade ago when we had one song written for this, and that was by our guitarist Jim Durkin, and I started being asked a lot of the questions like, hey, what's the new Dark Angel material going to sound like? Is it going to sound like Darkness Ascends, this classic album from the band, or is it going to sound like Time Does Not Heal, this later album which had its own pocket of classicness to it? And I started thinking, it's like, well, Dark Angel has always evolved. Like, if for those who are familiar with each Dark Angel album, none of them sounded like each other in any way, shape, or form. Like the band did not sound like, it sounded like in the same ballpark, but not the same music from album to album to album to album. The band has always evolved. So I just thought, well, what if we took that approach where this band has always evolved, even when we were putting out albums on the regular basis, let's still take the approach of the new material is not going to look back too closely at what we've done in the past. And that's what any band that's worth its salt is going to try to do, try to evolve itself, try to grow itself a little bit, but still retain the identity of the band. And that's one thing that I think we've been able to do with the new material. I love our new album so far. I can't wait for everybody to hear it. So I think the energy of Dark Angel is there. It is very identifiable as a Dark Angel album, but does it sound like Darkness Descends or We Have Arrived or Time Does Not Heal or Leave Scars? No. It sounds like Extinction Level Event, which that is where we are at right now. And it sounds like where Dark Angel should be right now. And that's where I was like, what if we just approach this album like we never stopped writing records? Like for the last 34 years, we just kept putting out albums regularly. Where would we be at now? And I'm like, oh, right here with this material right here. Because, that just seemed like the most genuine way to stay true to yourself. I don't like repeating things, and I don't think as a band we like repeating things. So, do the vocals sound like anything we've done in the past? No, they don't. Does the music sound like it? No. But still, is it Dark Angel? Absolutely. So there you go.
But that's like you've exactly described how I felt about listening to the singles. Because I went through like every single album down to
I'm sorry.
I'm fine. No. So like I have this thing like when I was in high school and Justin Bieber was coming out and everybody hated on Justin Bieber, and my approach was I'm not going to hate on it until I listen to it. And then I've sat and listened to the whole thing and I had my own opinion. So the same thing applies to Dark Angel. Had to listen for everything in order to, first of all, know who I'm talking to, and second of all, have my own opinion on that. And that's how I felt exactly about the two new singles. Like, I don't feel there's a gap. It sounds fresh. It sounds new. It doesn't sound overly compressed, but it has that identity, like you've mentioned, which is absolutely unmistakable. Which then leads me to my next question. So, you're coming out with the new album and then touring. You've mentioned before I've started recording that you're a lot on the tour. And one of the questions that I really like asking people who are actively being musicians is, how do you feel about touring, especially post COVID, post like the industry is completely different right now. How do you feel about touring these days?
Touring has well, that the one thing about touring is that this is touring and being involved in this lifestyle and this just the music industry. This is all that I've ever known since I was a kid. So I've never known anything else like, oh, I had to quit a job to go on tour, or I had this really good job and it was like, oh, what do I do? Do I keep the job and then try to fit in touring around it? No, I threw myself in. When I was young, I threw myself 100% into the deep end of this. It's like, you're going to sink, you're going to swim, and you're not going to sink. So you're going to have to figure out how to make this life work for yourself. And so touring back then was a much different prospect than it is now, but it's still that sink or swim mentality that you have to go into it. Like the touring industry has changed drastically, and you read about this from all the bands are talking about it now, and everything those bands are saying is 100% true. It's a drastically different entity now, and you see a lot of bands that this is not sustainable for them touring, and for whatever reasons it's not sustainable for them. So you see shows getting canceled, you see tours getting canceled from the big acts as well, the huge acts. We can't go on tour because it's it's going to cost us money. And that's where I do feel that you the challenges that we are all currently undergoing are navigable. You can navigate through them. You can negotiate your way through them. You just have to be smart about a lot of it. And, I've always referred to myself and all of our kind of, being musicians, we're all cockroaches. And I mean that in the terms of you cannot kill cockroaches, or we're all going to survive through all this mayhem when all, it just looks so dire and things are terrible and stuff. And we'll figure out ways to survive. We always have, God, 25 years ago when albums stopped selling overnight because of Napster, like it was overnight. We had to figure out ways to survive. I'm still here. Albums don't sell. You make zero money off albums. You make zero money off touring. I'm still here. Do I do this to become, rich and famous? No. So I do this because this is the lifestyle that I chose, and whatever financial situations that I am in, I have freedom. I don't have a 9-to-5 job. I never have. I've had one job in my life, and I was able to tour with it. And my last job was in the 80s. Like 1989 was the last time I worked a job. So I figured out a way to survive and thrive and be very, very active and elevating myself from every project that I've been in has, allowed me to step up and step up and step up. So applying any sort of knowledge that I've learned over the years, I'm now able to apply that knowledge. And I've learned a lot over the years, and I'm able to move forward, applying knowledge that I've learned. And you can make this life work. You can. You just have to be really smart about it. There is no profligate spending anymore. Not that there ever was in underground metal, underground thrash metal, or whatever. There's like, I've always had to be smart. I've never worked with ginormous budgets that, you could just waste money over here and over there. I admit in some of the Death Clock earlier areas where the TV network was involved, I used to look around and go, my God, network people, you could be spending your money so much more intelligently than you do. But all right, you want to load up our bank accounts? Okie doke. But you could be doing this a lot smarter and that be around in the long haul. If you guys, that's why Death Clock is something that has just been a totally separate entity. But having a TV network involved with TV money kind of thing, that was a totally different ball game. And that's something that I learned a lot from that. And I also am still able to apply a lot of the underground tenets of being a teenager and knowing how to, you got to manage a budget on this stuff. You got a touring budget. You've got X amount of money to be able to spend on your, travel accommodations, your hotels, your buses, if say you don't get a bus, you got to take the van, you got to take an RV. Sometimes you don't get the bus back in the day. So you've always got to figure out a way to move and shift when the tide changes. And as long as you're able to do that and you're not regimented in your approach with everything, nothing works forever. A lot of things work really well for that little period of time. We're able to make them work, but expect that to go like that at some point. And okay, I'll make that turn with it and I'll be okay. That's the way I've just always viewed life in general. So I'm always able to land on my feet, and any project I'm involved in, we always land on our feet. And sometimes things look super dire and it's like, oh my God, everything's going to go into the red. And it's like, well, maybe something does go into the red. We're not in this to make, we're into this to make a living, but sometimes you got to throw something back to make the next thing work even better. So as long as you're able to maneuver in those regards, you're going to be okay. That's the way I feel anyway.
It's a part of living that sometimes things go south and
right.
you can't work them out. you've mentioned not being it for the money and for the fame, and I think like that's one of the things are being more understood as we go. Like if you're doing music because you want to be rich and famous, me personally, I don't think that's the right way. You have to do it because your heart tells you to. And like,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think that's the only way. But I will have a question about the TV stuff. But before, you personally, you've been in so many acts over the years, and also producing Dark Angel and whatnot. How do you differentiate where every band you've been in has its own different identity? How do you differentiate between all of these from playing standpoint, from writing song standpoint?
I guess that's something where you're always you as a musician, and especially in a musician doing the kind of things that I do, you always try to serve the song best as possible. And that's why for me, um, being known as a well-rounded drummer that can play, can he groove? Okay, yeah, he can groove. Can he play super fast, thrashing, blasting beats? Yes, he could do that too. So being an all-encompassing drummer has always been much more important than being some kind of superlative. Um, and with all the hyperbole, like he's the fastest or the heaviest or the quickest or the whatever. That's never been important to me. But can he play every style imaginable? Then that's something that's cool, because just because you can play a million miles an hour, that doesn't mean you can play drums. That doesn't mean you can groove or have taste or lay down. You make the drums sing and talk. You can make them yell, and rage and things like that. But can you make a drum sing or speak or talk or that kind of approach has always been important to me. And I think that's since I do come from the era where there wasn't a thrash metal. There was music, and there was metal, but there wasn't just one style. And when thrash metal came around, a lot of people just they got onto that and that's it. I play thrash and that's it, man. And I'm like, okay, well that killer, that's great. However, is that going to serve you well down the road when you're like, wow, I got asked to play in this band, but I can't play their music because I can't, all I ever played was just all the time. And, I sound like a robot killer, but, do I sound like a heart and a pulse and a beating heart? No, but I sound like a digital robot like crazy. So, that kind of approach has I've always felt it will always do you well if you serve the music more than yourself. And that's why I know that I understand that I have, a style, or I have a number of different styles that all get to be placed into their pockets with each band. But that's where, my first band, Dark Angel, did not sound like my next band, Death, did not need that same approach. And then Death, the approach of those drums did not need to be involved in the Strapping Young Lad project with Devin Townsend. And then doing Testament right after that, Testament didn't sound like Strapping. So it's fun to be able to be a chameleon. And that's where it's like, oh no, I'd rather be known as somebody who could play everything rather than just be really good at one thing. And you do this better than anything else. So be good at all things. And that's always going to serve you as a musician really well, And so, like, say, coming full circle with a project like Bear McCreary, Bear needs all those styles lumped into one. Devin Townsend needed all of those styles lumped into one. Testament needed kind of just one style, be a heavy metal drummer, and Death was was not requiring, but it was pretty good if you could kind of play the gamut of stuff. Can you fusion? Can you jazz? Can you funk? Can you this and that with Death? I wasn't a great funk drummer, but I was a decent prog and metal drummer and jazz fusion. I could dabble in that well enough for Death. So being able to wear all these different hats has always been a good move, and always served me pretty well. And so that's why, like coming full circle to a band like Death Clock, where you not only got to try to serve the songs, but you also got to create a style for a non-existent cartoon fictional drummer. Like, how do you give that guy his style? But I tried to, so there you go.
And I think you landed that perfectly because like it's unmistakable. Even the parodies that came after the vlog and like running on YouTube, they do sound like they are trying to mimic you being behind the drum of a non-existing band, of like, having virtual personality,
Right.
which is just absolutely amazing. Pursuing that topic, whenever you had to switch, let's call them jobs, like whenever you had to switch
Sure.
with Chuck Schuldiner, with Devin, with whoever, would you also change the drum set completely, or did the articulation and the heart and the pulse you had across the years was serving that first, and then came the pursuit of the tone?
each each project, you know what, there were certain elements that I would change to make certain things easier, and sometimes that came with, like, say you would add a tom or remove a tom, or you would add an extra piece of gear somewhere that just fit. Like, I remember with Death Clock and Fear Factory, I remember having one of my toms removed, and then I put a hi-hat, an X hat, just a closed hi hat, and I have my regular hi hat here, and then I have an X hat over here. And that was because, like with Fear Factory, they had a couple of songs that had that sort of disco beat to it.
Yeah.
And since there's a song called, I think it's called Zero Signal. I'm trying to remember that one. I don't remember a lot of their material, but I remember there was a reason why I had the hi hat in there, and because I am a left-handed lead playing the cross-handed. Like, if you notice, I'm gonna I lead left-handed, so anytime I ever play, I'd have to do some kind of paradiddle so I can come with this hand. But playing double bass with that sort of thing, I can't do a paradiddle that fast and get the double kicks in there. So I just added an X hat for that. So there's some of the ways that having, you would alter your kit setup for each project. That's a minor thing to do. You might take your China, which is usually over here, and you put it over here because it's like you can get right there, right to it. That kind of thing. You maneuver the kit around a little bit, but having all approaching like say like approaching a Death Clock, like I would have the X hat for there in that thing, because of there was a few songs where the X hat just kind of, it made more sense to have an X hat kind of closed than a big washy open hi-hat. I tend to have a really washy open hi-hat, so using that kind of thing. But one of the challenges of Death Clock was, we when we went to record the first record, Brendan, and he freely says, he's like, I never recorded an album before. I never wrote songs before. I remember Brendan sent me a disc, and this was back in the days before there wasn't MP3s or that kind of thing or whatever. He sent me a disc it had about 23 songs on it, and each song, none of them were full length songs. They were 40 seconds of this, a minute of this, 35 seconds of this, 50 seconds of that song. All these songs that became songs on the record. But and Brendan explained to me later, he had said that when the art department would call me up and say, look, we've got room here we need 35 seconds of music. He's like, okay, I'll write 35 seconds of a song, whether it be a chorus or a riff or something, that's what they need. Get it all together really quick, send it over to him. That's the entirety of what the song is. So, like, you take a song like Mermaider. There was that part, Mermaider, 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 Mermaider. That was it. That's all they had. And so now all that was to that song. And Brendan was like, okay, I've got this other idea that I want to throw into Mermaider. So let's try to meld those two things together. And so that was one thing. Each we wrote the songs each day that we recorded them. Brendan, and he was just telling me this like 2 weeks ago. And he's like, he didn't know how much time to book, how much time do we need to get the drums done for this. So he booked a ton of time for getting the drums done, which it actually it came out to be perfect because we were able to focus and concentrate 2 songs per day. And so in the morning we would work on a song, get it all written together. I would take a couple of minutes and just go out in the parking lot and kind of get it together in my head, come back and track that song, get that song done, do a number of takes on that one, and then we move on to the next song and getting that one together, take a few minutes, come back, track that one. Towards the end of the day, we were able to get 2 songs done a day like that, like in that regard. The challenge being is for this to sound like it is a band that has been jamming for years and years and years together. And this is your album. You've been working on this material forever to make that cartoon band sound like they're a real band. That was its own challenge, where you had to make these songs sound very lived in, not just really stiff and static. And, you had to make them sound like they were alive. And you have 2 hours to write it and record it. So that was its own challenge there. And so, it takes a lot you got to put a lot of your musician skills together,
Yeah.
in to make that happen. So that was always good. And also the fact that all those early Death Clock albums, each version of those songs are the only time I'd ever played those songs. There was no rehearsal going into them. There's not like I came to the studio like, hey, we got 15 songs going on the record or whatever, and I've rehearsed all of these songs, and maybe we'll write a song in the studio kind of thing. But all these songs are well rehearsed and all that sort of. No, I didn't get any of that. It's like, you got to make this song sound like the guy who wrote the drums on it and the band that's performing on it spent a lot of time putting a lot of love and fussing into the whole song. Then you actually have to be able to play these things like you physically have been playing them for months and months and months and well rehearsed. And, so you got to step up your game quite a bit in that regard. So, which the final, the latest album, Death Album 4, that was the very, very first album that Brendan had sent me about 4 songs that went on the album in advance, because he was able to write them in advance because he was working on the movie, the Army of the Doomstar, and those songs were getting put into the movie in some permutation. So we had a number of songs written for the movie, and so that was the first time I ever got to rehearse any Death Clock song, have a little demo for myself of me playing the song, and I was even able to send it to Brendan like, hey, here's the approach I'm taking. What do you think? He's like, yeah, killer, So it took until 2022 for that to happen. And we started writing together in 2006. So it took 16 years for us to get to the point where it's like, hey, I got to rehearse a couple of songs before we went to the studio. So there you go.
That is absolutely amazing. One last question about Deathlock.
Yeah.
Whenever you were recording drums for those 30-second snippets, how often would you end up landing it on the first try?
A lot of those 30-second snippets were done before me. So those were my templates to learn. And so a lot of the actual songs, I would, I guess it was in such an unconventional style of lots of bands right in the studio. It happens. And a lot of times you hear that album and you say, I can tell this band hit the studio and they said to each other, we got nothing, because this album sounds like it was written in the studio. That's really painfully apparent in a lot of ways. Like a lot of these big bands, big old bands where you're like, you could tell they had nothing. They had nothing when they hit the studio, because this album just sounds flat and it's like, bleh. You could tell. There's not a lot of fire behind it. So to create that fire and make it sound like, wow, these guys are just crushing, you you only had a very short amount of time to do it. So, that's why I would like when it comes to Death Clock, it's like once we got the basic template of the song down, and I would take a moment and just go kind of put the entire song in my head so I could play it from start to finish. That was always important. I would do about 6 to 8 takes, usually around 8 takes, and usually around take 2 to 3 to 4. That's when it starts getting really good. And so you got the good bed track ready to go. And then the other ones after that are just kind of gravy, to where it's like comping. As as a musician, you might know, you might want to comp, like, yeah, say your take 3, you were warmed up. Take 1, you got out of the way. Take 2, starting to feel good. Take 3 was that's your bed track. That's your good one. But then you played that fill in take number 6, where it's like that fill right at the end of that thing. You'll pull that fill in and drop that right there. And then, your take 3, your verse 3 in take 3, right in the, maybe you had the verse and that's within take 5. That last one, that was getting really good. So you pull in that verse. Comping, I'm all about, that's fine. But there are a lot of major albums from bands that everybody knows and loves, where the drums were completely invented on a computer, and drummer from that band is a legendary drummer and has gone on to be, woo, you're a legend. It's like you didn't even record that album that is a landmark record in the drumming community, and so that's stuff like that. That's very important to me. It's like me playing it, it's like film it, film everything, show that it's me doing this, so that stuff like that's important to me. So there you go.
You've advanced my question about comping, because that was literally the last question I was about to ask. But I'm really glad we touched on that. Yeah, okay. I've promised I'm not going to ask too many questions about Deathlock, and then I broke my own promise, which I'm.
Oh, no worries. I love Death Clock. I love talking. Like my wife tells me, she's like, "Hey, you'll like this story. It's about you." So that's why I'm cool with talking about all of it. It's all good.
Right, but going back to Dark Angel, 2 shows in Poland. When was the last time you were in Poland?
Me personally was about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, with Bear McCreary.
Okay.
And we played Warsaw. We played Progressia in Warsaw. And I'm in Poland pretty frequently. Well, frequently as much as you can for being a musician. So I played there earlier this year. And Dark Angel, the last time we were in Poland was at the Mystic Festival a couple of years ago, and I believe that was our only time in Poland. So these 2 shows that are coming up in Warsaw and Wrocław are going to be our first headline shows, and of course, doing the Darkness Descends album on both nights. It's going to be pretty darn killer. But yeah, I think that's pretty much our first time there. I played there a number of times with Death and Death to All and Testament and bands like that. So, I've done a number of shows there over the years, and Poland's great. We love playing, Poland, great crowd, and everybody's so into it. And, metal is such a, it's a vibrant, living style of music over there, much more than the States, so, it's always incredible to play anywhere where you are accepted and, desired for. And seems like there's a desire for Dark Angel to be playing Poland, so we're all about it. We're gonna have a couple of great nights, and like I've told the last couple of interviews, it's like you got a band like Dark Angel playing a historical classic record like Darkness Descends. The entire set is just this night of intensity. We are relentless live, and the energy is just explosive. You do not want to be the person that gets the phone call the next day going, "Where were you? Like, why were you not there? Like, you missed this. What were you thinking?" So that's the way I see it. Don't do yourself the disservice and sit at home watching TV that night. Make sure you head out to the show, because you're going to have a great night of metal. It's going to be killer. So So there you go.
I absolutely love talking to you because you, for some reason, you exactly know where my mind is going to go, which is
Awesome.
absolutely amazing. But my question was that I was leading to, since you were in Poland, what's your favorite Polish food?
Polish food?
Yes.
Well, I love pierogies. Love that. Yeah, man. That's my favorite. I remember. I don't know if the company's here anymore, but there was a company based in Hayward, California. The very first time I ever had pierogies was a company called Igor's, and you just get a package of little single package pierogi in like 7-Eleven, like this
Yeah.
convenience
Yeah,
store
yeah.
up in Northern California. And I used to make tons of trips up to Northern California, going to see shows up there, and I'd always stop in at 7-Eleven, buy a few pierogies and eat those. But yeah, that's probably my favorite. I like them better than pierogies, but I'm down for the pierogi, definitely.
Okay. Okay. What kind of feeling?
Well, any sort of ground beef with the cheese, if we get that, that's what I was most used to, So anything with meat and cheese in it, you got my attention. Absolutely.
Okay. But like, I find it extremely it's not even funny, it's astonishing for me that Polish cuisine somehow found its way basically everywhere. Like
Nice.
you just know, like if you have pierogi, pierożki, whatever, żurek, you name it, you will be able to find it in every single corner of the world, which is just absolutely amazing.
That's got to feel pretty good.
It does. It
Mhm.
not gonna lie,
Absolutely.
it does. One last question before we finish. Um, Dark Angel is a rather old school band, but like from my research, when it comes to playing live shows, it's a rather old school band in a way that it's loud, it's heavy, it's fun. Like you feel everything. Like
Right.
even watching YouTube videos. Um, so my last question is, haven't you had as a band, as a producer of the new record, haven't you had like this I want to say thought that hey, maybe let's do the tour like everybody else is doing it. Let's do modelers, let's do quiet stages. Um, haven't you had this kind of thought that everybody's doing that, so maybe we should do it too?
No, I would go whatever anybody else is doing, I will always do the opposite. Like I never want to do what everybody else is doing. If it's because that's a wise decision or something, I understand that. But um like for instance, when it comes to like here's an example, like with the production of the new album, everybody I think just kind of you sometimes you track your drums on an electronic drum kit, or you sit at your home studio recording into a plug-in into your Pro Tools and all that sort of stuff, and you got your little vocal booth at your house where you sing the vocals into, and then you got your album done after all that. And we didn't take that approach at all. We have a very, very old school organic approach to the production of the album. We went to the Armory Studios up in Vancouver, legendary studios. I've done a number of albums out of that studio. Um, we tracked all the guitars live with amps, loud. The drums are recorded on real drums. There's no gridding. There's no, like I say, there's some comping, but these are all live performances, and that's the way it was done 40 years ago. So let's go back to that sound. It has production technology and microphones and things like that up themselves. Yes, so we do utilize that, but this is a very, very old school approach of recording where there's live people doing live takes, and you don't just like, if a lot of times you got that great rhythm guitar take on this little section here, just like cut it, copy, cut it, print it, cut it, copy, copy, copy. I've been in bands where that's been done. We didn't do that on this one. Play the song from the start, play it all the way to the end, then do it again, then do it again, then do it again. And if you need to comp things, and okay, track 3, you did, that's your bed track. Okay, track, like I said earlier, in take number 7, that's good little spot there. Plug that little thing in there. You can comp things, but you know, we multi-tracked everything with, you know, tons of live, loud, everything. And so, and a lot of that is due to the fact that everybody is doing that. I'm not going to do that. It's going to be like this, you know, and whether we win or lose by it, at least we did it. And who knows if we start a new trend, like, hey, Dark Angel did that. It wouldn't be the first trend we started. You know, Dark Angel has started a ton of things that everybody does now. We did that back in the day. Certain elements of songwriting that we created of individually ourselves 100% that are tenets of music now. That's, and I could show you the genealogy of these riffs, this approach, this sort of thing. And so if Dark Angel creates a new template and a new trend of approaches, again, then killer. You know, I've got no problem with taking the bull by the balls and being the leader. And so, like, well, nobody does it like that. You don't do things like that. You don't tell me that. You know, you cannot impose your will upon me. If I want to do something this way, it's going to get done this way. But nobody else does that. It's unheard of. It's like, then even more reason to even try it. You know, like, if I fail, I fail. Big deal. You know, but if I win, then everybody wins. So there you go.
That's the absolute best ending to this interview that I could have ever.
Excellent.
No joke. So
All right.
whoever is listening to this beautiful talk that I had with Gene from Dark Angel, 2 gigs in Poland, one in Warsaw, one in Wrocław, you have to be there. You know where to get the tickets. Winiary Booking is your place to go. Thank you very much and have a great night.
You too, brother. Thank you very much. Well, hopefully we'll see you at the shows, man. Definitely.
100%. Thank you.
All right, brother. We'll see you.